first part of the slides, which I think were sent to you as an introduction to me. I'm not spending any time on this, just to tell you that auditing has been in my DNA since the start of my career, because when you qualified as a chartered accountant in the UK at the time, you spent your time doing financial audit. So all of what I say is from the background of somebody who believes in the value of audit. And in fact, when I was a procurement consultant to the public sector for several years, when I worked for KPMG and Deloitte & Touche, I would be very happy to help my audit colleagues frame procurement-related questions to the public authority or to their legal advisors. So that's all I really wanted to say about me. There are half a dozen things which we wanted to briefly touch on in our opening part of the presentation. Firstly, who the book is for. Secondly, what the book is about. Thirdly, why it matters. And as I mentioned, I'll then ask Andrew to share the OECD perspective on why it particularly matters now. And then Peter to talk about how it will help public sector bodies in Germany. And I'll round off by talking about the what next, because this book really falls into two parts. There are more than 30 pages of practical guidance on how to audit public procurements. But also, there is a series of ideas, policy recommendations for how auditors can continue to evolve and improve, and also how others can act to help them to do so. So that's the substance of what we're going to cover. But of course, this is not an event just about the book. It's more about the broad subject of a procurement audit and why it matters. The audience for this book is, of course, public sector auditors. But in order to be able to effectively audit a procurement, you need to you need to understand what procurement officials are doing. And that's why there are more than 30 pages of questions that auditors might ask, depending on the circumstances. But also these are questions which procurement officials will want to also deal with when they are designing and conducting procurements. And that's why when Peter and I have been running training events for the last 8 years at the European Court of Auditors on procurement audit, we have very much been talking to an audience, partly of auditors, but also partly to participants from the European institutions and agencies who are actually running procurements. The fact that there is a policy dimension to the book, of course, also means that it has a wider audience amongst those who make decisions about what procurement audit should do and how it can do it more effectively at a political or senior level within organisations. What we've tried to do is focus in the book on the areas which are particularly challenging for auditors. Procurement audit isn't easy. And one of the reasons why the Court of Auditors have continued to want us to deliver these events is because experienced financial auditors and experienced performance auditors are not necessarily all specialists in procurement audit. So there are things like how you plan and prepare a procurement and how to make sure that the awarding authority isn't making irreversible errors at that stage, how they undertake difficult areas of a procurement in the cases that they arise, i.e. the conduct of dialogue and negotiations, and most importantly, how they manage the contracts. Because people think that public procurement ends when you've awarded the contract. Well, it doesn't. Value for money in a public procurement is what you get in the execution of the contract. And that requires effective management of the procurement that you've awarded. I've used the phrase value for money, and that's to underline the fact that another message of the book is that, of course, it's important to comply with the law. Of course, it's important to follow procedures, but those are not necessarily guarantees that a public authority will secure value for money. And just to be clear, the term value for money, as we have said many times, is not the lowest price. It's the equivalent of what the EU public procurement directives call the best price quality ratio. And of course, in the context of people-focused infrastructure projects, that can mean social and environmental dimensions to what represents quality. The orientation of the text is to procurements under Directive 2014-24 EU, but actually the ideas of procurement audit stretch beyond that to procurements by international organisations, procurements by European institutions and agencies, and indeed procurement in other parts of the world. So that is why the book is broadly directed. The key focus of the book is that procurement matters, where it always did matter, but at a time when resources are constrained and priorities are changing because of the COVID-19 pandemic, effective audit is a way for citizens to be sure the public bodies are spending money on what is their core aim, which is to deliver infrastructure and deliver services to citizens. It goes beyond that, though, of course, because 14%, according to the EU's estimates, of EU GDP relates to public procurement. And that's why public procurement is an important dimension of the effective functioning of the EU internal market. So put simply, procurement matters because procurement audit matters because public procurement matters, and they both matter because they're about the delivery of services to citizens. But not all procurements are equally risky, and we address in the book how auditors should prioritise different procurements and different elements of procurement. The other message of the book is that procurement audit is not a dry technical activity. It requires the interpretation sometimes of the behaviour of those who are undertaking the procurements. Different actions can lead to different outcomes, and different outcomes can result from different motivations. We set out in the book some examples of where an auditor needs to understand not just what has happened, but why. So the skills of a procurement auditor, like any other auditor, are based around understanding and working with people. Andrew, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry if I didn't hear the last part of what you said. Your station seemed to have gone on mute, so apologies for any pause there. Hey, it's wonderful for you to ask me to come and join you for the launch of this book today. Very mindful that it's Michael and Peter's show, so I'll keep my own comments brief, and really congratulations to the two of you for the work and the publication and getting this across the line. There's always a whole lot more that goes into it than what anyone appreciates when holding the front cover of these books up. Look, grateful for the fact that you asked me to read this with a public management perspective in mind, as opposed to a procurement perspective. And really the point of saying this is that I think it contributes to the balance of the book, the fact that irrespective of anything I've said to you during its preparation, your view and Peter's view has been to look at different perspectives in the way in which you have brought a whole lot of information and experience together in this book. And look, I just really want to underscore the fact that when reading it, I found it practical. Really liked the emphasis on transparency and the reference to important institutions like independence as well, that all feature strongly in the book. The practical aspect for me is the fact that you've taken a Socratic approach and asked lots of questions throughout it, and made that accessible with the use of bullet points and the like to help the reader get through the material. And with that, I think you've actually improved the coverage and its relevance to a range of circumstances in a cross-country environment, as you've held back, I think, some experience that both of you have got by not being too prescriptive with any one application, so that it can be used broadly. And as you've done that, you've kept it modern by referring to recent developments such as COVID and how that may impact on how people approach procurement activity. The transparency, well, look, we all know fundamentally with audit that it's such an important feedback loop into decision making and into the design of policy and programs, that if it's not available, it actually doesn't exist, and so therefore, because no one can get to it to read it. So the fact that you've underscored that is important, and I think the independence as well. You know, an area that we're doing a lot of work on is around the trust in government, and the fact that the integrity of processes really contribute to that over time, and that there's no single one action that contributes to an increase in trust in government, but a whole lot of small attributes like the integrity of process, the integrity of audit and its independence certainly makes a positive contribution. You know, I've been grateful for the opportunity to work with you, Michael, over the last 3 years with courses on budgeting at EIPA. And in the same way that audit, you could say, is the ex-ante expression of expenditure, audit is that ex-post expression in terms of reviewing, in addition to the financial statements that may be prepared. So, you know, all part of a cycle, all part of a system that's interconnected, and with that hugely important in terms of the function it performs with audit, and to ensure that it has very much the same visibility of its role in connecting that system together. I think with a reference to EIPA is important as well, just really the fact that you're hosting this event and it's done with EIPA as for the publication of the book for the event and for so many resources. This is just another resource that contributes to the library of stock that EIPA has got, and really pleased that this is an addition to it. I'll stop there. As promised, brief comments. Very nice to see this event take place, and wish you all the success and the feedback that you get back, that you receive and Peter receives on the book you've prepared. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm now going to give the floor to Peter Braun and to share some thoughts on how the ideas in the book could help improve the delivery of public procurement, particularly in the context of his experience in the German market. Peter.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Andrew, for your nice comments. I'd like to come back to Michael's comment he made earlier. Public procurement audit is not easy. It's a difficult task. And it's actually something we are currently mandated by a German state. So I've used the book already, although it's only out for a couple of days now in my practice. And in this mandate, the German state is basically outsourcing its procurement audit function for EU-funded projects, simply for the reason that they don't have the sufficient internal resources, the sufficient internal capacities to deliver procurement audit, which I believe, especially as a taxpayer, is a real shame. And I do hope that the book will contribute to the education of public sector officials to gain or regain the necessary knowledge about procurement audit. I'm therefore especially pleased that at least 2 of the key chapters of the book will be translated into German, so that the German audit community can benefit from the findings, which of course are mainly based on Michael's professional experience in that area. I'd like to touch on another aspect. Andrew mentioned COVID. And I don't know about you, but in my practice in the last, what I've seen in the last half a year is it's quite shattering from the procurement professional's point of view, or from my professional experience. I've been doing this in Germany. I've been advising contracting authorities in Germany for the last 16 years. I've never seen something similar happening ever before. We've had a number of enormous direct awards on the basis of extreme urgency. Literally billions of euros spent overnight in the form of an email, where hitherto there were strict procedures and utmost transparency for even minor purchases. And here I think the book will help in our common path way back to improved procurement culture. So it will be definitely important to get back to the new normal, and getting there, I think it needs tough procurement audits of what happened in the last half a year, but it will also need, and that's another underlying theme of the book, it will also need a collaboration or a more collaborative approach between the auditors and the public sector bodies who are actually audited to improve the procurement practice, to improve the procurement culture of the public sector body, to regain the culture we actually had, at least here in this country, prior to COVID-19. That will be a major task in many areas of the market. So I think the book was very timely and will hopefully make a good contribution to this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Just to conclude the presentation part briefly, there are about 38 different actions in the final chapter of the book, and I'm certainly not going to go through all of those. They're divided into two broad categories. Firstly, what auditors can do, and I think we've already underlined the fact that auditors need to intervene perhaps at an earlier stage, particularly in the planning and preparation phase of the procurement, where errors made there are very difficult to reverse because of the possible risk of them being attributed to non-equality of treatment. So that's one of the main interventions that auditors can take, and to intervene at an earlier stage and look forward. As regards what others can do, I think we come back to transparency. And a central recommendation of the book is the idea that a national public procurement authority should establish a register of contracting authorities in a territory, require them to publish an annual procurement plan and an annual return of contracts awarded. John Tizard, who I've worked with in the UK on a number of occasions, used the phrase a doomsday book of procurement relating to the land mapping that took place in the 11th century in UK. But it needs to go beyond that. What there actually needs to be also is transparency about how public authorities are ensuring that performance against those contracts is being delivered. So there needs to be performance data published. This will in particular assist authorities in awarding future contracts if they can see how those who they're thinking of placing on the shortlist meet the criteria of skills, efficiency, and reliability, which is one of the key potential capability criteria in the directive. So we come back to transparency. The other thing I want to mention is that part of this role can also be played within public authorities, not just by executives, but also by audit committees. And we have recommendations for how public sector audit committees, who scrutinise the way public bodies perform procurements as well as other aspects of their activity, and also scrutinise the performance of the auditors. Their role is important because one of the key messages of OECD Sigma is that public procurement doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is part of a panoply of measures to be taken associated with good governance. But at a authority level, that's a role performed by non-executive public sector audit committees. The other important recommendation is about how auditors should be appointed and assessed. Auditors often are sometimes reluctant to be as robust as they need to be because of the fear of being removed by the awarding authority as auditors. We are very clear that the appointment of auditors should be made by independent bodies and should not be subject to any undue influence, either formally or informally, by the awarding authority. So that is what I wanted to say by way of introduction.